I told my husband I wouldn't go on the family trip he planned, not after he invited his ex-girlfriend and the ex who once broke me. It's just a vacation, he said, and his friends laughed. So I canceled everything, booked myself a one-way flight, called my lawyer, and watched their smiles fade in seconds. Julia's coming with us to the Bahamas, Timothy announced over breakfast, scrolling through his phone like he hadn't just invited his ex-girlfriend on our anniversary trip. Marcus will be there too. We're all adults now. I set down my coffee with deliberate calm, watching my husband of 12 years casually explain how my ex-fiancé, the man who'd destroyed me so thoroughly I needed therapy just to trust again, would be sharing our beach house. Timothy's poker buddies sat around our living room, actually applauding his emotional maturity, while I stood there holding their beer refills, realizing this wasn't spontaneous. They'd been planning my humiliation for weeks. Before we dive deeper, if you believe that no one should pay for their own humiliation, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more women who need these stories. Derek leaned back in his chair, cards in hand, grinning at Timothy. Man, that's progressive. Most guys wouldn't have the confidence to pull that off. It's not about confidence, Timothy replied, dealing the next hand without looking at me. Megan's stronger now. She's past all that old drama. Right, babe? Every eye in the room turned to me. Shane, Paul, Derek. All waiting for my response while I stood frozen in the doorway, a tray of their favorite imported beers balanced in my hands. The same brands I special ordered every month because Timothy insisted on being a good host. The same poker night I'd been serving for 12 years while they discussed their investment strategies and vacation homes, never once asking about my consulting business that paid for their snacks. Of course, I heard myself say, my voice steady despite the chaos in my chest. We're all adults. Shane's wife Grace caught my eye from across the room where she sat with the other wives, her expression a mixture of horror and sympathy. He knew. She understood what this meant. But like me, she stayed silent, trapped in the unspoken rules of these gatherings where wives supported their husbands' decisions, no matter how cruel. Timothy's mother Catherine's voice suddenly filled the room from his phone speaker. Oh, Timothy, I'm so proud of you for taking the high road. And Julia is such a lovely girl. She still asks about you, you know. This will be good for everyone. Good for everyone. I retreated to the kitchen, setting the empty tray on the counter with shaking hands. Through the doorway, I could hear them continuing their game, Timothy basking in their approval. Not one of them questioned the cruelty of forcing me to vacation with Marcus, the man who had called off our wedding 3 days before the ceremony, announcing he'd been seeing someone else for months. The humiliation had been so complete, so public, that I'd moved cities just to escape the pitying looks. And Timothy knew every detail. He'd been the one to help me pick up the pieces. He'd held me through the panic attacks, driven me to therapy appointments, promised he'd never let anyone hurt me like that again. Now he was serving me up to Marcus like a party favor, wrapped in the bow of supposed emotional evolution. The kitchen clock read 9:47 p.m. In 3 hours they'd leave, slightly drunk and full of my carefully prepared snacks. Timothy would climb into bed satisfied with his evening, never wondering why I'd stopped coming to bed at the same time as him years ago. He'd fall asleep immediately while I lay awake calculating how much this month's poker night had cost. The special beer, the aged steaks I'd grilled, the artisanal cheese plate Catherine had insisted elevated the evening. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Carol in California. How's your evening? She always checked in during poker nights, knowing how much I dreaded them. Timothy just invited my ex-fiancé on our anniversary trip. I typed back, then deleted it. Carol would insist I leave immediately, would offer to fly out tomorrow to help me pack. But it wasn't that simple. Nothing ever was when you'd spent 12 years weaving your life so tightly with someone else's that you couldn't tell where you ended and they began. Instead, I typed the usual and hit send. From the living room, I heard Timothy's voice rise above the others. The beach house has 6 bedrooms, so everyone will be comfortable. I've already put the deposit down. 25 grand for the week, but split between everyone, it's reasonable. Split between everyone. Except I knew how Timothy's math worked. Julia wouldn't pay, she was a guest. Marcus would conveniently forget to transfer his share. Catherine would claim poverty despite her healthy retirement account. And somehow, like always, the full amount would come from my consulting earnings while Timothy took credit for organizing such a thoughtful trip. Megan makes good money now, Timothy continued, and I could hear the pride in his voice. Not pride in me, but pride in what my income allowed him to do. Her little business is really taking off. Little business. I'd billed $300,000 last year, managing complex international contracts that required fluency in 3 languages and expertise Timothy couldn't even spell. But to him and his friends, it would always be my little business, something cute I did between maintaining his life. The laughter from the living room grew louder. Someone had won a hand. Money changed holders. Money they could afford to lose because their wives managed the household budgets with surgical precision, stretching dollars to cover their hobbies and poor investment choices. I pulled out my laptop and sat at the kitchen table, opening my bank app. The joint account showed the $25,000 withdrawal Timothy had made that morning. No discussion, no warning. Just gone. The beach house deposit for our anniversary trip where I'd be forced to smile and make small talk with the 2 people who'd nearly destroyed me. Below that, smaller charges peppered the statement. Lunch at Julia's favorite restaurant last Tuesday when Timothy was supposedly at a client meeting. A jewelry store purchase 3 weeks ago. Not my birthday, not our anniversary, not Christmas. Hotel charges from his business trips that lined up suspiciously with Julia's conference schedule. The pattern was so clear now, laid out in the merciless honesty of financial transactions. This trip wasn't about emotional maturity or moving forward. It was about Timothy getting everything he wanted. His wife's money, his ex-girlfriend's attention, and the admiration of his friends for being so evolved. And he expected me to fund it all while being grateful for the opportunity to prove I'd healed. Grace appeared in the kitchen doorway, pretending to need more ice. "Megan," she whispered, glancing back at the living room. "This isn't right. You know that, don't you?" I looked at her, this woman I'd known for 5 years but never really talked to beyond party pleasantries. "It's just a vacation," I repeated Timothy's words. She shook her head. "No, honey. It's a test. And they're all waiting to see if you'll fail." Grace's words hung in the kitchen air long after she'd returned to the living room with her unnecessary ice. Yes. They were all waiting to see if I'd fail. The poker game continued for another hour, their laughter growing louder with each beer, while I stood at the sink mechanically washing dishes that could have waited until morning. By the time they left, Timothy was floating on their approval, practically glowing as he locked the front door. "Great night," he said, not really to me, just to the universe that had validated his choices. He headed upstairs without another word, leaving me alone with the ghost of what had just happened. Tuesday morning arrived like any other betrayal, quietly wearing the disguise of routine. Timothy's alarm went off at 6:45, and I heard him humming in the shower, some classic rock song he only half knew the words to. The sound drifted through our bedroom wall while I sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, staring at our joint account. $3,000. The withdrawal had posted at 11:47 p.m. last night, while his friends were still here, while I was serving them aged whiskey from the bottle I'd been saving for our anniversary. The description read travel planning services, but I knew better. Timothy didn't use travel agents. He considered them an unnecessary expense, always insisting I could book things cheaper online. My fingers moved across the keyboard, pulling up our credit card statements. More charges appeared like breadcrumbs leading to truth. A high-end luggage set from 2 weeks ago. Resort wear from that boutique Julia loved to tag in her Instagram posts. A consultation fee at that spa where Catherine got her treatments, probably booking services for the trip. The shower turned off upstairs. In 12 minutes he'd come down expecting breakfast. I closed the laptop and moved through my morning choreography: Colombian roast in the coffee maker, eggs from the refrigerator, wheat bread positioned by the toaster. My hands performed tasks my mind had abandoned, operating on 12 years of muscle memory. I arranged his vitamins in the weekly organizer he'd asked for but never used, placing Tuesday's pills in a small dish beside where his plate would go. Blood pressure medication he needed, vitamin D he'd read about in some men's health magazine, fish oil supplements he claimed helped with focus but never seemed to improve his memory about our anniversary or my birthday. Timothy appeared at exactly 7:03, hair still damp, wearing the polo shirt I'd ironed yesterday. He kissed my cheek, a reflex more than affection, and settled into his chair with the satisfied sigh of a man whose world operated exactly as expected. "Perfect timing," he said, reaching for his coffee. "Smells amazing, babe." I set his plate in front of him. Eggs over medium, toast cut diagonally, 3 strips of bacon arranged parallel. The same breakfast he'd eaten every weekday for 12 years, except for that brief period when he'd tried intermittent fasting and made everyone around him miserable with his hunger-induced mood swings. "So," he began, cutting into his eggs with surgical precision, "about that trip we discussed last night." My coffee mug paused halfway to my lips. He was really going to do this. Present it like we'd already agreed, like the ambush in front of his friends had been a mutual decision. "The family reconnection trip," he continued, spreading jam on his toast with careful strokes. "I've been thinking about it for weeks. We need this, Megan. It's time to show everyone we've evolved past old drama." The way he said "we" made my stomach turn. This wasn't about us. This was about him, his image, his need to be seen as the emotionally advanced husband who could orchestrate healing like he was conducting a symphony. "Julia and Marcus are both free that week in June," he added, scrolling through his phone as if checking important messages. "It's perfect timing. Julia and Marcus." He said their names like they were old college friends, not the 2 people who had systematically dismantled my ability to trust. Julia, who still sent him funny memes and birthday messages with too many hearts. Marcus, whose wedding cancellation email I still had saved in a folder labeled, "Evidence of Why I Needed Therapy." "I know what you're thinking," Timothy said, finally looking up from his phone. "But we're different people now. Stronger. More mature." He launched into what was clearly a rehearsed speech, complete with hand gestures and meaningful pauses. "There's this podcast I've been listening to, Modern Love Dynamics, and they talk about how truly evolved couples can transcend past hurt. It's about choosing growth over grudges." I watched his mouth move, his jaw working through both breakfast and borrowed wisdom he'd twisted to serve his purposes. He quoted episodes, mentioned specific timestamps, referenced conversations between the hosts about emotional intelligence and relationship evolution. He'd been preparing this performance for weeks, maybe longer, studying how to make cruelty sound like kindness. "The host, Dr. Miranda Walsh, she says that avoiding our triggers keeps us trapped," he continued, now gesturing with his fork. "But confronting them in safe, controlled environments, that's where real healing happens." Safe, controlled. As if forcing me to share beach cocktails with the man who'd publicly humiliated me was somehow therapeutic. As if watching Julia drape herself over lounge chairs in bikinis Timothy would pretend not to notice was medicine for old wounds. "And think about what this says about us," he added, his voice taking on that TED Talk quality he adopted when he thought he was being profound. "That we're secure enough in our marriage to vacation with exes. That's next-level confidence, babe. Next level." Everything with Timothy had levels, like life was a video game where collecting enough emotional maturity points unlocked special achievements. He wanted to unlock progressive husband, while I paid for the expansion pack. "Catherine thinks it's brilliant," he added, as if his mother's opinion was the ultimate validation. "She says it shows we're not threatened by the past." I finally spoke, my voice surprisingly steady. "And what does Julia think?" Timothy's face brightened like I'd finally joined his team. "She's thrilled. She says it's so refreshing to find people who don't let history define them." Of course she was thrilled. She got a free vacation and proximity to the man she'd never quite let go of, all wrapped in the disguise of emotional evolution. "And Marcus?" I asked, each syllable careful. "He's interested in moving forward too," Timothy said, returning to his eggs. "He mentioned something about closure." Closure. The word sat between us like an uninvited guest. Marcus had closed things pretty definitively when he sent that email 3 days before our wedding, when 200 guests had to be uninformed, when I had to return a dress I'd dreamed about since I was 12. "This is therapeutic," I heard myself say, the words coming from some distant place where women agreed to their own destruction. Timothy beamed, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "I knew you'd understand. You're so much stronger than you were back then." He returned to scrolling his phone, satisfied with my compliance, already moving on to whatever occupied his mind next. Sports scores, probably, or checking if Derek had responded to some group text about their fantasy football league. Under the table, hidden from his view, I typed a single word to Carol: emergency. My phone buzzed immediately with Carol's response, but I couldn't check it. Timothy had already moved on to discussing logistics, completely oblivious to the earthquake he'd just triggered in my chest. He was talking about rental cars and restaurant reservations while I sat there, outwardly calm, inwardly calculating the timeline of my own unraveling. That evening arrived with its usual cast of characters. Timothy's poker night had become as predictable as a sitcom rerun, except tonight the script had changed. Derek arrived first as always, carrying his lucky poker chips in a leather case that cost more than most people's rent. Shane and Paul followed, already debating some sports statistic that neither could prove but both would die defending. I'd prepared their usual spread: imported cheeses, crackers arranged in perfect fans, olives that cost $28 a jar because Timothy insisted on maintaining appearances. The dining room table was already set with the good poker chips, the ones Timothy had bought with my year-end bonus, claiming they were an investment in his networking. "Gentlemen," Timothy announced as they settled in, his voice carrying that particular tone men adopt when they're about to say something they think is revolutionary. "Before we start, I want to share something extraordinary." I stood in the doorway between the kitchen and dining room, holding a tray of their drinks, already knowing what was coming. Timothy's need for an audience was as predictable as his breakfast order. "Remember that trip I mentioned? The Bahamas." He paused for effect, shuffling cards with practiced ease. "I've invited Julia and Marcus to join us." The room went silent for exactly 2 seconds. Then Derek's face split into a grin that made my skin crawl. He actually stood up, reached across the table and high-fived Timothy with the enthusiasm of a frat boy celebrating a conquest. "Bro, that's brave," Derek said, settling back into his chair. "Testing boundaries like that? Most men wouldn't have the balls." Paul laughed, already reaching for his scotch. "Wait, Julia as in your ex? And Marcus as in?" He gestured vaguely toward me, not quite meeting my eyes. "Megan's former fiancé," Timothy confirmed, his chest puffing with pride. "We're showing the world what emotional maturity looks like." They all turned to look at me then, standing there with their drinks, waiting for my reaction like I was part of the entertainment. Shane at least had the decency to look uncomfortable, but Derek was practically gleeful. "Modern problems require modern solutions," Derek said, raising his glass in my direction. "Your wife's a saint for going along with this, Tim." I forced my feet to move, setting their drinks down with steady hands while my mind screamed. They'd known. The casual way Derek responded, Paul's knowing laugh, they'd all known this was coming. "Let me get Catherine on speaker," Timothy said, pulling out his phone. "She's been dying to discuss the details." His mother's voice filled the room before I could escape to the kitchen. "Timothy, darling. Have you told Megan about the wonderful plan?" "Just did, Mom. She's being very mature about it." "Oh, I knew she would be." Catherine's voice pitched higher with excitement. "And sharing accommodations will save so much money. One big happy family." One big happy family. The woman who'd spent 12 years making subtle digs about my cooking, my decorating choices, my inability to produce grandchildren on her timeline, was now orchestrating my public humiliation and calling it family bonding. "Julia texted me yesterday," Catherine continued, her voice syrupy sweet. "She always asks about Megan with such concern. Such a thoughtful girl." I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, my knuckles white against the granite. Julia asking about me with concern was like an arsonist inquiring about fire safety. The woman had been circling Timothy since the day we got married, showing up at his company events, sending birthday messages that belonged in romance novels, always maintaining just enough plausible deniability. "We should coordinate the meal planning," Catherine was saying. "Megan dear, you're so good at that. Julia has some dietary restrictions now. She's doing that wonderful clean eating program. They expected me to cook for her. To meal plan around the dietary needs of the woman trying to steal my husband while my ex-fiancé watched." The absurdity of it made me want to laugh, but I was afraid if I started, it would turn into something else entirely. I returned to clear empty glasses, moving silently while they continued discussing my humiliation like a vacation itinerary. That's when Grace appeared at my elbow, Shane's wife who usually spent poker nights scrolling her phone in the living room. "Need help with dishes?" she asked loudly, then dropped her voice as we entered the kitchen. "Megan, we need to talk." She turned on the faucet, creating noise cover, and leaned close. "They've been planning this for 3 weeks. Shane told me about it after golf last Sunday." 3 weeks. While I'd been nursing Timothy through a cold, cooking his special soup, they'd been plotting this ambush. "Derek bet Paul $50, Grace continued, her voice urgent. He thinks you'll crack before the trip even happens. Paul thinks you'll make it to day 2 before having a breakdown. They were betting on my breaking point. These men who ate my food, drank my wine, sat in my home every week. They turned my pain into a gambling opportunity. Shane thinks it's cruel, Grace added, but he won't say anything. You know how they are. I did know. The brotherhood of mediocre men protecting each other's worst impulses, validating cruelty as strength, mistaking emotional abuse for evolution. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Grace looked toward the doorway, then back at me. Because someone should. Because watching this makes me sick. Because next time it could be me they're betting on. We stood there, 2 women washing dishes that could have waited, bound by the shared understanding of what it meant to be married to men who treated their wives like supporting characters in their own hero narratives. The poker game continued until midnight. I heard them through the bedroom floor, their laughter growing louder with each beer, occasionally punctuated by Catherine's voice still offering suggestions through the speaker. Timothy would stumble in eventually, satisfied with his evening, smelling like cigars and self-congratulation. I lay in the darkness doing math. $8,000 for the beach house he'd already booked. $12,000 for first-class tickets because Timothy insisted on flying premium when spending my money. $5,000 for the activities. Yacht rentals, private dining, excursions designed to showcase his generosity. $25,000 to fund my own humiliation. That's what my 12 years of loyalty, support and financial provision had earned me. The privilege of paying for a reunion between my husband and his ex while being forced to make small talk with the man who'd shattered me. Timothy's snoring started at 12:47 a.m., the satisfied rumble of a man who'd won everything without understanding he'd been playing alone. I stared at the ceiling, Grace's words echoing in the darkness. They were betting on when I'd break. What they didn't know was that I'd already broken years ago and rebuilt myself into something they couldn't recognize. A woman who understood the difference between breaking and bending, between falling apart and falling free. Tomorrow I'd start making my own plans. Tomorrow I'd start making my own plans. That thought echoed in my mind as the clock on my nightstand glowed 3 a.m. Timothy's snoring had shifted to that deeper rhythm that meant nothing would wake him for hours. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet silent on the carpet we'd chosen together 5 years ago, back when I still believed in our future. My home office had become my sanctuary over the years, the one room in the house where Timothy rarely ventured. He called it my little workspace, never understanding that this 10 by 12 room generated the income that funded his entire lifestyle. I closed the door softly and powered on my laptop, the blue glow illuminating stacks of client contracts and tax documents I'd been meaning to file. I started with simple searches. Cancellation policies for vacation rentals. Refund windows for airline tickets. The legal requirements for opening a separate bank account in my state. Each search felt like plotting an escape route, breadcrumbs leading away from the life I'd been trapped in for 12 years. Then I decided to check our financial accounts, really check them, not just the cursory glance I usually gave while paying bills. What I found made my hands shake. For the past 2 years, Timothy had been transferring money from my consulting deposits to something labeled Morrison Investment Holdings. The name sounded official, legitimate even, but I'd never heard of it. Line by line, transfer by transfer, the theft revealed itself. $67,000. My money moved without my knowledge or consent. I took screenshots of everything, my fingers moving with the kind of focused intensity one usually reserved for client deadlines. Each image got immediately forwarded to a new email account I created on the spot, one with a password Timothy would never guess because it wasn't our anniversary date or his mother's birthday or any of the predictable combinations he used for everything. Dawn was breaking through the blinds when I finally picked up my phone. Elena Vasquez answered on the third ring, her voice alert despite the early hour. We'd been roommates at Northwestern, had studied for the LSATs together before our paths diverged. She to law school, me to the corporate world that had eventually led to consulting. Megan, it's 6 in the morning. What's wrong? I need a lawyer, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. A divorce lawyer. The pause lasted maybe 2 seconds before Elena's voice shifted, becoming sharper, more focused. Tell me everything. I did. The trip, the exes, the stolen money, the betting pool, on my mental breakdown. Elena listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds that told me she was taking notes. First things first, she said when I finished. Document everything. Every text, every email, every financial transaction. Forward it all to a new email account he doesn't know exists. I need you to open a separate bank account today, not tomorrow, today. Move your consulting payments there immediately. Can I do that? Legally. It's your money from your business. You're protecting your assets. Megan, from what you're telling me, this is financial abuse. The X situation is emotional abuse. I can have divorce papers drawn up within 48 hours. That fast? For you? I'll have them ready in 24. But first, protect yourself financially. Visit multiple banks if you need to. Get your important documents somewhere safe. And Megan? Check for hidden credit cards. Men like Timothy always have hidden credit cards. After we hung up, I sat in my office watching the sun rise fully, painting the walls gold. Timothy would be up in an hour, expecting his breakfast, his routine, his perfectly controlled world. Let him have one more normal morning. I had work to do. His softball practice started at 10 every Saturday. He'd leave by 9:30, giving me a 3-hour window. I made his breakfast as usual, smiled when he kissed my cheek, even reminded him about his sports drink in the refrigerator. He left whistling, gym bag slung over his shoulder, completely unaware that his wife had declared war. My first stop was Chase Bank, where our joint accounts lived. The personal banker, a young woman named Adriana, didn't question why I needed to withdraw my business funds and close my business checking account. She'd seen this before, her eyes holding that particular combination of sympathy and solidarity that women share in these moments. Next was Bank of America, where I opened new accounts in my name only. Checking, savings, a safety deposit box for my grandmother's jewelry that had been sitting in our shared box for years. My grandmother's pearl necklace, her wedding ring, the emerald earrings she'd left me. All relocated to a space Timothy couldn't access. The third stop was supposed to be quick. Just retrieving some investment documents from our Wells Fargo safety deposit box. That's where I found it. A credit card statement addressed to Timothy at his office. An account I'd never seen before. $18,000 in charges over the past year. Restaurants I'd never been to, hotels and cities he'd supposedly visited for business. Charges that lined up with disturbing precision to Julia's Instagram posts. That conference in Miami last March? Julia had posted beach sunset photos the same weekend. The client dinner in Chicago? Julia had tagged herself at the exact same steakhouse. I photographed every page, every charge, every corresponding social media post I could find on my phone. Elena would want this evidence. The financial infidelity was almost worse than the emotional kind. At least affairs of the heart didn't come with interest rates. By the time I got home, it was 1 p.m. Timothy had texted about dinner plans with his parents, something about celebrating the trip planning. I sat at my laptop and began the cancellations. Each one required a different approach, a different excuse. The beach house. I'm so sorry, but we've had a family emergency. My mother-in-law has had a serious health event. The irony of using Catherine as an excuse made me smile. The airline tickets. Unfortunately, we have a medical situation that prevents us from traveling. Not a lie. My mental health definitely qualified as a medical situation. The yacht rental. We're concerned about weather conditions that week and need to cancel. The only storm brewing was the one Timothy hadn't seen coming. Each cancellation generated a confirmation email, a digital receipt of my revolution. I forwarded them all to Elena, who responded with a simple thumbs-up emoji and keep going. The private dining reservations were almost too easy to cancel. The restaurant manager was so apologetic about our family emergency that he offered to waive the cancellation fee. I accepted graciously, adding another small victory to my growing collection. By 3 o'clock, every single element of Timothy's grand humiliation tour had been systematically destroyed. $25,000 in reservations canceled. Some with fees, some without, but all gone. The money that had already been charged would be tied up in refund processing for weeks, and Timothy's carefully orchestrated timeline would collapse. I sat back in my desk chair looking at the email chain between Elena and me. 43 emails in one day. 43 steps toward freedom. My phone buzzed with another text from Timothy about dinner. Mom's made reservations at La Bernardine. 7 p.m. Wear that blue dress I like. The blue dress he liked. The one that made me look presentable for his mother. The one I'd worn to every family function for 3 years because Catherine had once complimented it and Timothy decided it was therefore the only appropriate outfit for family gatherings. I texted back a simple, okay, and returned to my computer. There was still work to do, plans to make, a future to build that didn't include Timothy Morrison or his toxic family or their betting pools on my sanity. The revolution had started at 3 in the morning with a simple Google search. By 3 in the afternoon it was well underway. The blue dress hung in my closet like a costume for a play I no longer wanted to perform in. I pulled it out, held it against myself in the mirror, then deliberately hung it back. Tonight required armor, not appeasement. I selected my charcoal business suit instead. The one Timothy said made me look too serious, the one I'd worn to land the Hamilton Industries contract. If I was going to detonate my marriage at La Bernardine, I'd do it dressed for war, not submission. Sunday morning arrived with deceptive calm. I'd been awake since 4, sitting in the kitchen with my laptop, watching the refund confirmations roll in from yesterday's cancellations. Each email was another brick removed from the prison Timothy had built around me. By 5:30, I'd arranged the evidence across our kitchen table with the precision of a prosecutor preparing for trial. Bank statements showing the theft. Credit card bills revealing the affair. Screenshots of Julia's Instagram posts that coincided with Timothy's business trips. I made coffee, good coffee, the expensive Ethiopian blend I usually saved for special occasions. This qualified. I sat at the head of the table for the first time in 12 years, claiming the seat Timothy always occupied, and waited. The morning sun crept across the papers, illuminating 12 years of financial abuse in harsh detail. Timothy appeared at 7:15, earlier than usual for a Sunday. He was whistling, wearing his weekend khakis and the golf shirt I'd bought him last Christmas. The whistling stopped when he saw me. "What's all this?" His voice carried forced casualness, but I saw his eyes scanning the documents, trying to piece together what I'd discovered. "Evidence," I said, taking a slow sip of coffee. $67,000 in unauthorized transfers. $18,000 in hidden credit card debt. Hotel charges that match Julia's travel schedule. Would you like me to continue? His face went through a transformation that would have been fascinating if it weren't so pathetic. Confusion melted into understanding, understanding hardened into anger, and anger twisted into that particular brand of condescension he wielded when cornered. "You went through my private accounts?" "Our accounts," I corrected. "The ones funded by my consulting work. The money you've been stealing to finance your affair with Julia." "That's ridiculous. Julia and I are just friends." His phone started buzzing on the counter where he'd set it. I could see Julia's name flashing on the screen. "She seems upset about something," I observed. "Maybe her spa appointments?" Timothy grabbed his phone and I watched his face pale as he read the messages. More buzzing, Marcus this time, then his mother, then Derek. The symphony of their collective panic played out in real-time notifications. "You canceled everything." His voice cracked slightly. "The trip, the house, the flights, you canceled everything." "Every single reservation," I confirmed. "Though I should mention, some of the deposits are non-refundable. About $8,000 worth. Consider it my exit tax." "You had no right." "I had every right. It was my money funding your emotional terrorism. My income paying for my own public humiliation. Did you really think I'd subsidize a vacation with my ex-fiancé and your girlfriend?" "She's not my—" He stopped, probably realizing denial was pointless when the evidence was spread across the table like a buffet of his betrayal. His phone rang. "Catherine." "Put her on speaker," I said. "Let's make this a family affair." He hesitated, then hit the speaker button, probably hoping his mother would somehow fix this like she'd fixed every other mess he'd created since childhood. "Timothy, what is happening?" Catherine's voice filled the kitchen, shrill and demanding. "Julia just called me crying. She said everything's been cancelled. The entire trip is ruined. Mom, Megan." "Megan what?" I interrupted, loud enough for Catherine to hear. "Megan discovered her husband has been stealing from her for years? Megan found out about the affair? Megan finally grew a spine." "How dare you speak to me that way?" Catherine hissed through the speaker. "After everything this family has done for you." "Done for me?" I laughed, actually laughed. "Catherine, I've paid for your Botox, your dental work, your carpet cleaning when you spilled wine last Christmas. $1,800, by the way. I've funded your son's entire lifestyle while he played softball and called it networking. What exactly have you done for me besides criticize my cooking and compare me to Julia? You're being hysterical. No, I'm being factual. Would you like me to email you the receipts? I have them all. Every dinner I've paid for, every gift Timothy's given you with my money, every family vacation I've funded while you told everyone what a good provider your son was. You're destroying this family. This family destroyed itself. I'm just refusing to pay for the funeral. Timothy grabbed the phone, taking it off speaker. I could hear him trying to calm his mother down, making promises he couldn't keep, assuring her everything would be fine. But I saw his hands shaking. The emperor had finally realized he was naked. While he paced the living room, frantically making calls, to Derek, to Paul, to anyone who might validate his victim narrative, I went upstairs and packed with surgical precision. One suitcase, that's all I needed. My laptop with all my client files. My passport that I'd renewed last month without telling him. My grandmother's pearl necklace that she'd worn to her own wedding, back when marriages meant something different. The photograph of my parents, taken 2 years before the car accident, before they died, never knowing their daughter would spend 12 years disappearing into someone else's life. I left the wedding album. Left the anniversary gifts he'd bought with my money. Left the jewelry he'd chosen because Catherine approved. Left 12 years of accumulated compromises that had slowly erased the woman I used to be. When I came back downstairs, Timothy was on the phone with Julia. I could hear her voice, high and plaintive, asking what she was supposed to tell people. He was promising to fix everything, to book new reservations, to make this right. The man who'd never apologized to me once in 12 years was prostrating himself to his ex-girlfriend while I stood in my own home with a suitcase. I have to go, I said, not to him but to the house itself, to the walls that had witnessed my slow dissolution. Elena will be in touch about the divorce papers. Timothy spun around, phone still pressed to his ear. Divorce? Megan, this is insane. You're overreacting to a simple vacation. A simple vacation where you invited my ex-fiancé and your ex-girlfriend on my dime. Where your poker buddies bet on my mental breakdown. Where your mother orchestrated my humiliation while I paid for the privilege. Julia's voice rose from the phone, asking who Elena was, demanding to know what was happening. Timothy tried to shush her, but it was too late. The mask had slipped and even he couldn't pretend anymore. I rolled my suitcase to the door, pausing for one last look at the man I'd wasted 12 years trying to please. He stood there, phone in one hand, the other reaching toward me, not with love or apology, but with the desperation of someone watching their meal ticket walk away. Your coffee's getting cold, I said, nodding toward the abandoned mug on the counter. You should drink it. It's the last cup I'll ever make you. The door closed with a quiet click, softer than the thunderous collapse happening behind it. In the driveway, my car waited, packed with the only things that mattered. As I backed out, I saw Timothy through the kitchen window, still on the phone, still trying to salvage his carefully constructed delusion. My phone buzzed with texts, Catherine's threats, Derek's disbelief, even one from Marcus asking if I was okay with everything. I deleted them all without reading past the preview. The only message that mattered was from Elena. Papers ready. Barcelona office has an opening. New beginnings await. The drive to the airport stretched before me like a corridor between two lives. Behind me, 12 years of compromise and diminishment. Ahead, something I couldn't quite name yet but felt in my bones. Freedom, perhaps, or at least the possibility of it. My phone sat in the cup holder, buzzing relentlessly with messages I had no intention of reading. Each vibration was another desperate attempt to pull me back into the chaos I'd just escaped. The parking garage at JFK felt like a sanctuary. I chose long-term parking, the 7-day minimum that would turn into something much longer. As I pulled my single suitcase from the trunk, my phone buzzed again. This time I looked. Grace. Shane's wife had sent something labeled, "You need to see this." I opened it while walking toward the terminal. Screenshots filled my screen. The poker group's text chain, something called Timothy Support Squad, that they'd apparently created after I'd left. The messages made my stomach turn but also, strangely, made me smile. Derek had written, "She's probably off her meds. Timothy dodged a bullet if she's this unstable." Paul's contribution was somehow worse. "Bro needs to put his foot down. Can't let a woman control the finances anyway." But it was Shane's message that surprised me. Maybe she has a point about the ex thing being weird. immediately followed by Derek and Paul mocking him for being whipped. I forwarded everything to Elena with a simple note. More evidence. These are his character witnesses. Her response was immediate. Perfect. Keep them coming. Judge loves seeing the support system. The security line moved slowly, giving me time to notice things I'd ignored on every previous trip. The couples around me, some holding hands, others barely speaking. The solo travelers like me, some looking anxious, others relieved. I wondered which category I fit into. Maybe both. My phone buzzed again. Julia this time. The first message dripped with fake concern. Megan, I heard what happened. Are you okay? This seems like such an extreme reaction. I'm worried about your emotional state. I almost laughed out loud. Julia, worried about my emotional state. The woman who'd been circling my marriage like a vulture for years was suddenly concerned about my well-being. Her next message came 30 seconds later, the mask slipping. This is incredibly selfish. Do you have any idea how many people you've inconvenienced? The third message arrived as I reached the gate area. Fine. You want honesty? I already told everyone we were rekindling things during the trip. Timothy promised me. He said you were basically separated anyway, that you were just roommates. He said you wouldn't care. There was the admission I hadn't even known I needed. I screenshotted everything and forwarded it to Elena with the subject line, Exhibit A, Conspiracy to Commit Adultery. Elena's response included a laughing emoji followed by, You're making my job easy. Keep documenting. The gate agent called for business class boarding. For 12 years, I'd watched Timothy book himself business class for his important trips while insisting we should save money by flying economy. Today I'd spent the extra $1,000 without hesitation. My money. My choice. My comfort for once. Champagne. The flight attendant smiled warmly as I settled into the wide leather seat. Absolutely, I said, accepting the crystal flute. The bubbles rose to the surface like tiny celebrations. I lifted the glass slightly, toasting silently to the woman I was about to become, whoever she might be. The plane filled around me. Families with children, business travelers with their laptops already out, couples heading to romantic getaways. Everyone moving toward something. I was moving away from something which felt just as important. As we climbed to cruising altitude, I pulled out my phone one last time. There were 47 unread messages now. Timothy, Catherine, Derek, Paul, even Marcus had joined the chaos. I ignored them all and opened a new message to Timothy. It was time to end this properly. Timothy, I began typing carefully. By now you've discovered the extent of what I know. The $67,000 you stole. The credit cards you hid. The hotels that matched Julia's travel schedule perfectly. But here's what you don't know. Marcus contacted me last week. He wanted to discuss starting fresh during the trip. He actually used the phrase, Timothy said you'd be receptive. Your own conspiracy turned against you. I continued, each word deliberate. Your poker buddies are right now discussing whether I'm mentally unstable. Derek thinks I'm off medication. Paul thinks you should have controlled me better. These are your character witnesses. These are the men you chose over your wife. The final paragraph came easily. I'm not asking for your understanding or your apology. I'm simply informing you that Elena Vasquez will handle all future communication. The locks will be changed by the time you read this. Your belongings will be in the garage. Your mother can help you move them. After all, she always said you deserved better. Now you're free to find it. One last thought. Your poker buddies can explain the concept of folding when you're holding losing cards. You've been bluffing with nothing for 12 years. I'm calling. I hit send, then immediately turned off my phone. Not airplane mode, completely off. The flight attendant returned with dinner menus and I chose the salmon, the expensive wine pairing. The dessert I actually wanted instead of the one Timothy would have suggested was more appropriate. Outside the window, the coastline disappeared as we headed over the Atlantic. Somewhere below, Timothy was probably calling emergency poker sessions, seeking validation from men who measured success by how well they controlled their wives. Julia was likely crafting social media posts about betrayal and disappointment, carefully cropping out the parts where she tried to steal another woman's husband. Catherine would be rallying her book club, painting me as the ungrateful wife who abandoned her perfect son. Let them. I had Elena building my case, Grace secretly documenting their meltdowns, And most importantly, I had a business class seat to Barcelona and the first glimpse of who I might be when I wasn't trying to be someone else's idea of perfect. The businessman next to me glanced over. Business or pleasure? Neither, I said, surprising myself with honesty. Escape. He raised his whiskey in understanding. The best trips usually are. The plane continued its journey through the night sky, carrying me away from everything I'd known and toward everything I might become. Below us, the ocean stretched endless and dark, like the future I was flying toward. Unknown but infinite with possibility. For the first time in 12 years, that didn't terrify me. It thrilled me. The Mediterranean sun transformed ordinary moments into small miracles. 3 weeks had passed since my plane touched down in Barcelona, and I discovered that freedom had a taste: bitter orange marmalade on fresh bread, strong coffee that didn't require Timothy's temperature specifications, and the salt air that drifted inland from the port. I sat at Café Del Mar, my laptop open to Elena's latest email, feeling the weight of the past lifting with each word I read. The judge was particularly unimpressed with Catherine's voicemail. Elena had written, "Calling you a gold digger while simultaneously admitting she knew Timothy was siphoning your consulting income was, in the judge's words, remarkably self-incriminating. Also, both Julia and Marcus have been subpoenaed as witnesses. Julia's text admissions about rekindling things are being treated as evidence of conspiracy to defraud marital assets." Below Elena's update, my screen showed 3 new contract proposals. Word had somehow spread through the international consulting community. The American woman who'd walked away from financial abuse had become something of a cause célèbre. Companies wanted to work with someone who understood reinvention, who could navigate complex transitions. My story of professional survival had become my strongest selling point. The waiter, Carlos, refilled my coffee without being asked. He'd learned my routine over these 3 weeks. Morning coffee, afternoon work session, evening wine when the sun painted the city gold. "You look happier today," he observed in accented English. "I am," I said, realizing it was true. Not the performed happiness I'd worn like armor for 12 years, but something genuine and unfamiliar. My phone buzzed with a message from Grace. She'd become my unexpected ally, a weekly chronicler of the aftermath I'd left behind. Her updates read like dispatches from a war zone where I'd been the only casualty who'd actually escaped. "Update from the home front," she'd written. "Poker night is officially dead." After the group chat screenshots went public during depositions, none of the wives will let their husbands associate with Timothy. Derek's in real trouble. Sarah found out he encouraged Timothy's behavior and moved to her mother's with the kids. She's filing for separation. The message continued with details that would have shocked me a month ago but now felt like inevitable dominoes falling. Catherine's being investigated for tax fraud. Turns out claiming $9,000 in Botox as home improvements on someone else's taxes is illegal. Who knew? Also, Shane finally grew a spine. Told everyone at the country club that he always thought Timothy was a parasite. Direct quote. I saved the messages to forward to Elena later, then scrolled through my phone to check something I'd been avoiding: social media. I hadn't posted anything since leaving, maintaining complete radio silence, but the internet had been busy without me. Julia's carefully curated image had crumbled spectacularly. Someone, probably one of her former friends, had leaked the screenshots of her admitting to pursuing Timothy. The comments under her latest post, a quote about authentic living, were brutal. "So authentic you tried to steal a married man?" One read. "Maybe live authentically single," suggested another. Marcus had fared no better. His new girlfriend had apparently discovered his planned reconciliation with me during Timothy's trip and dumped him via Instagram story. The story was gone now, but Grace had screenshotted it. A picture of Marcus's belongings in trash bags with the caption, "Taking out the garbage." The most satisfying update came from Timothy's softball league. The treasurer position he'd held for 5 years, the one that gave him access to team funds I'd been unknowingly replenishing, had been revoked after an audit revealed discrepancies. Those discrepancies matched exactly the amount he'd claimed as team expenses on our taxes. The league's Facebook page had a terse announcement about maintaining financial integrity that everyone knew was about him. Senora Morrison? I looked up to find a well-dressed woman standing beside my table. She was perhaps 50, with silver streaking through dark hair and an air of quiet authority. Just Megan, I corrected. Morrison is my ex-husband's name. She smiled. Of course. Megan then. I'm Isabella Ruiz. I believe we have mutual connections in the consulting world. May I? She gestured to the empty chair. Isabella, as it turned out, was a venture capitalist who specialized in funding women-led consulting firms. She'd heard about my work through 3 separate clients, all of whom had mentioned the American consultant who'd arrived in Barcelona with nothing but expertise and determination. I invest in stories, Isabella said over her quart adieu. Not just business plans or profit projections but the stories behind them. Yours is particularly compelling. Because I ran away from my marriage? Because you recognized your worth beyond someone else's definition of it, she corrected. That kind of clarity is rare. It suggests an ability to see through complexity to find simple truths. That's invaluable in consulting. We talked for 2 hours. Not about my past but about my future. About the possibility of building something larger than solo consulting. About contracts with European firms looking for American market insights. By the time we finished, she'd offered me not just a contract but a partnership. A consulting firm focused on helping women navigate professional transitions. The contract would guarantee you more than you made in the last 3 years combined, she said, sliding a proposal across the table. But more importantly, it would give you equity. No one could ever take it from you. I looked at the number, then at the sunset beginning to paint the cafe in warm light. 3 years of funding Timothy's lifestyle, compressed into 1 year of funding my own future. I'll need to review this with my attorney, I said, though I already knew my answer. The one handling your divorce. Elena Vasquez? He's excellent. We've worked together before. Isabella stood, leaving her business card. Take your time. Good foundations take time to build. After she left, I sat alone as the city transformed around me. Couples walked past speaking rapid Catalan, tourists posed for photos, locals headed home from work. None of them knew my story, and that anonymity felt like the greatest luxury. Grace sent one more update as the sky darkened. Timothy showed up at Shane's house drunk last night, crying about how you destroyed his life. Shane's Ring camera caught everything. He actually said she was supposed to just accept it. Shane told him to leave or he'd call the police. I pictured Timothy standing on Shane's doorstep, finally understanding that his carefully constructed world of male validation and female subsidy had collapsed. He was supposed to accept it, that I would fund my own humiliation, smile through his betrayal, cook for his ex-girlfriend. Instead, I was sitting in Barcelona building something that belonged only to me. Tomorrow I would meet with Isabella again, would begin the process of creating a business that no one could steal or diminish. But tonight I simply sat in the warm Mediterranean evening, feeling the kind of peace that comes not from revenge but from complete and total release. The Mediterranean evening held me in its amber light as I stood there, feeling the weight of what freedom actually cost. Not in dollars or euros, but in the parts of myself I'd had to excavate and examine, the comfortable lies I'd had to abandon. The wine in my glass caught the last rays of sun, and I held it there, suspended between who I'd been and who I was becoming. 6 months. That's how long it had taken for the legal machinery to grind through the wreckage of my marriage. Elena called that morning, her voice carrying the satisfaction of a lawyer who'd won more than just a case. The judge signed everything, she said. Timothy owes you $67,000 in restitution for the unauthorized transfers. The house is yours. And here's the interesting part. The financial abuse charges are now part of his permanent record. No reputable financial firm will touch him. I'd expected to feel something triumphant in that moment, some surge of vindication. Instead, I felt only a clean, simple peace, like diving into clear water after years of swimming through mud. The money will be garnished from his wages if necessary, Elena continued. Though from what I hear, those wages are now coming from a sporting goods store. A sporting goods store? Assistant manager at Dick's Sporting Goods. Ironic, considering. The apartment buzzer pulled me from the memory. Carol had arrived from California, her first visit since I'd fled to Barcelona. When I opened the door, she stood there with her practical roller bag and that expression she'd worn since we were kids. Part concern, part admiration, part relief. You look different, she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled like airplane air and her favorite lavender hand cream. You look like yourself. We sat on my small balcony with glasses of local wine while she updated me on the aftermath I'd left behind. Carol had always been the family intelligence officer, somehow knowing everything about everyone without seeming to pry. Catherine's been effectively exiled from her social circle, Carol reported, her tone matter-of-fact. The voicemail where she called you a gold digger while admitting to the financial theft went viral in their country club community. She tried to host her annual charity luncheon last month. 3 people showed up. 3. And one was the caterer. Carol's smile was wicked. She's selling the house apparently. Moving to a retirement community in Arizona where no one knows her. The image of Catherine, queen of passive aggression, reduced to anonymous retirement living, should have brought satisfaction. Instead I felt only distant pity. She'd built her entire identity on her son's success, never realizing she'd constructed it on a foundation of other people's money. And Julia? I asked, though I wasn't sure I cared about the answer. Moved to Portland. Deleted all her social media. My friend Rachel saw her working at a wellness center, teaching yoga to people who don't know she tried to steal someone's husband while pretending to be enlightened. Carol paused, swirling her wine. Marcus is the really pathetic one. His reputation in business is completely shot. The court documents were public record. Everyone knows he tried to use your ex-husband's invitation to manipulate you. Last I heard he was living with his mother, working remotely for some startup that doesn't Google its employees. And Timothy? Carol's expression shifted to something between disgust and pity. Living in Paul's basement. Derek won't speak to him after his wife left. Apparently the divorce is brutal. Shane actually testified against Timothy in your case, said he'd witnessed years of financial manipulation. And Timothy? She shook her head. He tells anyone who'll listen that you destroyed him over nothing. Over a simple vacation dispute. A simple vacation dispute. Even now he couldn't admit what he'd done. There's something else, Carol said, pulling out her phone. Someone sent you an email through me. Timothy's younger brother, Dylan? I'd always liked him, the quiet one at family gatherings who seemed as uncomfortable with the Morrison dynamics as I was. Carol handed me her phone. Dear Megan, the email began. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I needed to say this. I'm sorry. Not the hollow sorry my family throws around, but genuinely, deeply sorry for being a coward. I knew about Julia. I saw them together at a restaurant 2 years ago when Timothy said he was at a conference. I knew about the money. Mom would brag about her treatments, and I knew she couldn't afford them. I knew you were paying for everything while they treated you like an employee. I should have said something. Should have warned you. But I was scared of being exiled from the only family I had. Now I realize that family was toxic and my silence made me complicit. I've cut contact with both Timothy and Mom. The full extent of what they did to you, the financial abuse, the emotional manipulation, the planned humiliation, it's unforgivable. I'm in therapy now trying to understand how I normalized such cruelty. You deserved so much better. I hope Barcelona is giving you the peace you never found here. With genuine remorse and respect, Dylan. I read it twice, feeling something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of release. Dylan's apology was the only one that mattered because it was the only one that acknowledged the full truth of what had been done to me. That's unexpected, Carol said softly. He was always different from them, I replied, handing back her phone. Maybe that's why he can see it clearly now. We sat in comfortable silence as the city lights began to flicker on below us. Barcelona spread out like a glittering promise, each light a life being lived, choices being made, freedom being claimed or surrendered. Do you miss anything? Carol asked eventually. About your old life. I considered the question. Did I miss the house with its perfect kitchen where I'd cooked thousands of meals for people who barely thanked me? The social gatherings where I was introduced as Timothy's wife, never as myself? The constant mental mathematics of keeping everyone happy while disappearing piece by piece? I miss who I thought I was going to be, I said finally. The woman who believed marriage meant building something together, not being consumed by someone else's appetite. But that woman had to die for this one to live. Carol raised her glass. To necessary deaths. And expensive resurrections, I added, touching my glass to hers. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of choices I'd made, prices I'd paid, freedom I'd purchased with everything I'd once thought mattered. Timothy was right about one thing. I had destroyed something. I'd destroyed the prison I'd helped him build around me, bar by bar, compromise by compromise. Standing there on my Barcelona balcony, wine in hand, sister beside me, business proposal on my desk, and future spread before me like an unmarked map, I understood something fundamental. Silence isn't the absence of sound. It's the presence of choice. And for the first time in my life, I could afford to choose exactly what filled it. If this story of ultimate revenge and liberation had you cheering for Megan's escape, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when she sat in business class, sipping champagne while Timothy's frantic calls went unanswered. What was your most satisfying moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more powerful stories of transformation and triumph. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.